Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to have you here for our second speaker series. Before we get started, I just want to ground us in Communities of Opportunity, which is the initiative that is sponsoring this speaker series. Communities of Opportunity is a public-private partnership. It's a community initiative funded by King County through Best Starts for Kids and the Seattle Foundation. We work to support community partners that are working to advance better health, safe and affordable housing, and increased economic opportunity and stronger community connections in King County. We approach this work by investing in social change that works to shift policy, systems, and relationships toward a just and equitable future for all of King County. We do this by working across 3 strategy areas where we invest in community-led solutions. We do this in our place-based cultural community work, which is our partnership work. We do this through Seattle Foundation's policy and system change grants and across our learning community. Through these 4 strategies, our COO partners work to change the conditions and root causes that create the inequities and barriers to thriving in our 4 result areas: health, housing, economic opportunities, and community connections. This speaker series is actually part of our learning community strategy. We believe that learning and investing in continuing to examine root causes and new models is important for our community in order to create the new models and conditions and policies and systems that we need. So many of our community partners have been instrumental in creating new models and new strategies that we wanted to create a space to uplift those learnings and share them with you all today. So our speaker series is an opportunity for us to share the learnings of our community partners and the work of other leaders and thought partners in King County. So we started this Cultivating Community Transformation speaker series last month. And we started it with a dynamic panel of 3 of our original governance group members and leaders of the Communities of Opportunity Initiative. That included Michael Brown from the Seattle Foundation, Celie Savusa from the White Center CDA, and AJ, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I forgot his last, McClure, excuse me, AJ McClure, who is now part of a community-based organization, global to local, but at that time had been with us at King County during the early days of Communities of Opportunity. And we really had some takeaways that we wanted to share with you. The takeaways that we learned from that first session are about being able to root our work in continuous learning, which is really what we're here today, is to continue to learn and engage together. We also really wanted to uplift the learnings from those 3 and from our current governance group around the importance of new kinds of partnerships, working across sectors, across geographies, across silos, to think about how we can work collaboratively and together to create the change that we need. It will take all of us in order to create an equitable and thriving King County. We also wanted to uplift the focus on policy and systems change, that the inequities that we see are not accidental, and it will take intentional change to create policies, systems, structures that work for all of us. Next slide, please. So as I shared, one of our result areas is economic opportunity. And COO has recognized, as we followed the lead of our partners, to really look beyond just opportunity and to look towards justice and imagining and moving towards a world where everyone is thriving. This means that we actually need to rethink our current economic structure and systems. We know that health is not just the absence of disease, but the presence of well-being. Housing cannot just mean the presence of buildings, but it's actually about a safe and affordable, supportive place to live, grow, and thrive. And so for economic opportunity, it means more than just the presence of jobs, but economically thriving communities that are inclusive of our youth, elders, supportive of local and small businesses, and centered on generative values and infrastructure rather than extractive and exploitative practices and systems. Across the region, community leaders are re-envisioning economic systems to center the well-being of people and our environment. And our COO partners are among those who are leading the region towards a more just and person-centered economy. We see a range of approaches, and these include community stewardship of buildings and lands, mutual aid, apprenticeships, and workforce development opportunities that provide quality jobs, and community-driven economic development models and supportive infrastructure for small business and local economic systems. Today, we're excited to be able to dive into some of these topics and learn more from some of the thought leaders in our community. Thank you for joining us. So today we will have a panel. We'll have some time where they're going to talk with each other. And during that time, if you have questions that are coming up, please go ahead and drop them in the chat or the Q&A button, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. We will be capturing those and kind of synthesizing and answering some of them through the chat function or being able to present them for the panelists later on during the second half of the conversation. If you would like to have the closed captions, you can also click on the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And I do want to acknowledge that this is being recorded. Because it's a webinar function, I don't believe that most videos will be shown, but wanted to just let you know that it will be recorded, but will also be available at our website once the event is completed. So if you've missed anything or you want to share it with other folks later, it will be available for us to for you to share. So thank you, and I'll pass it back to Roxana.
Thanks, Kai. So I have the honor of leading us in a grounding exercise. And while it's so incredibly important to always do some grounding exercises, it's incredibly important today because today we're talking about imagination and cultivating imagination. And as one of my teachers, Trisha Hersey, says, we are unable to cultivate our imagination if we're not rested. And so I ask that you all kind of put aside what you can put aside, pick a comfortable place in your home, wherever you may be, to observe and bear witness to today's panel and what people have to share. And so that we can really take in, and create and join our panelists today in their imagining and how they are bringing to life their imaginations. And so I want to take a really quick second, ask you all to put your hand on your heart and to take a couple deep breaths. We don't know where y'all are coming from. We don't know how your day has been going. But we want to bring you and welcome you into this space and hope that you are present in the ways that you can be. So I just invite you all to take a couple deep breaths before we begin today's panel. Thank you so much for partaking in that exercise with us. And again, I hope you are comfortable, you are well hydrated, and you're hopefully eating some snacks at the moment. So at this moment, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our moderator. Deric Gruen co-convenes the People's Economy Lab, whose mission is to connect and align visionary community-based leaders and build their capacity to reshape our local economy. He is also the co-executive director for policy and programs at Front and Centered, a statewide coalition of communities of color for climate justice. Deric has worked in communities and economic development and climate and environmental justice for nonprofits, higher education, foundations, and government. Deric has a family full of social workers, is a lifelong Seattle resident, and is a graduate of Garfield High School, Greenlake Streetball, and the UW Evans School of Public Policy and Governance. So I will pass it off to Deric, and I'm so excited to hear what y'all have to share today.
Thank you, Roxana. Thanks for having me here, and thanks everyone for joining. I'm really excited about the conversation today because we get to do something special and important, which is talk about what we really need and engage our imagination in moving beyond the systems we have towards the new systems that can realize a better world for all of us. So in my work, we talk about this as a transition that is inevitable because of the current economy is built on a worldview of white supremacy, of colonialism, of patriarchy, of consumerism, extraction for growth. It's maintained through militarism, whose purpose is to dig, dump, and burn resources for exploitation for the enclosure of wealth. So we know all that, but we also know that's not sustainable. And we know the transition is inevitable, but that justice is not. And today, we're going to imagine what a just transition to a new economy looks like from the people leading the work. We'll talk about how we can change our relationship to land and money, how we can practice deep democracy and shift our worldview towards care and healing and the well-being of people and ecology. Now, the root words of economy are home and management. And today we have a great panel of local leaders who are reimagining the economy and taking it into their own hands, the management of their home in their community. So I'll introduce our speakers here. We have a great lineup. First, Tepa Vaina. Tepa Vaina is the program director at Utopia. Tepa was born and raised on the island of Tutuila in American Samoa, proudly identifying as Fa'afafine. She serves on the staff of Utopia Washington as the program director. Her work has been dedicated to human services, from supporting adults with developmental disabilities, mental health challenges, and houseless communities to providing direct support for sex workers. She brings an array of experiences that help inform the programs of Utopia Washington. Tepa also holds a Master of Science in Counseling Psychology from Chaminade University in Honolulu, an accomplishment that she continues to use today if it means furthering her work and achievement. As a sex worker herself, she sends out a strong message that sex workers are also educated and hardworking individuals. One of her passions is performing Siva Samoa. She believes that she feels most free and confident when she is dancing. One interesting fact about Tepa is that she is also a former beauty queen. In 2012, she was crowned Miss Society of Fa'afafine in American Samoa. When asked about her experience at Utopia Washington, Tepa expressed that she has never felt this much fulfillment before, and that she's exactly where she needs to be at this point in her life. Next, we have Jiguna Gishiro, who's a lab leader at the People's Economy Lab. Jiguna is a Seattle-based community economic development leader who specializes in advancing economic models that shift power to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. He's passionately committed to building thriving communities by ending systems of white supremacy and the extractive economy. Jiguna drives transformative change by supporting the development of initiatives, institutions, and individuals that are leading the just transition to a regenerative economy. He's deeply committed to the legacy and leadership he has inherited from his parents, John B. and Peter Gishiro, pioneering organizers in Seattle's African immigrant communities. His personal background and extensive experiences in banking and government, community development make him uniquely suited for this work. Jiguna currently serves as a director on the boards of Urban Family, Nehemiah Initiative, African Chamber of Commerce, Seattle Metro Chamber of Commerce, and One Vibe Africa. And next we have Ivana Enabulale, is a core member of the Queer the Land, a queer, trans, BIPOC advocate and affordable housing organizer. Ivana leads the Housing Circle in Queer the Land, nurturing the dreams of queer, trans, BIPOC of building a home in a safe community space. Their passion is not only working on unique housing strategies, but also finding ways to combat the mental aspect of displacement and gentrification. Ivana has also worked for the City of Seattle in the Parks Department for 8 years, working as a recreation attendant, event scheduler, and assistant coordinator. Ivana is a featured organizer in the book Nourish, a collection of short stories, photos, and recipes from 10 local Seattle organizers. Ivana is part of the Bill and Melinda Gates 100 Changemakers project with a permanent plaque in the Discovery Center. Ivana is part of Decriminalize Sex Work, which is a collective working towards decriminalization and destigmatization of sex work. Ivana participated in the entire legal process of purchasing Queer the Land's new 12-bedroom home in Beacon Hill, Seattle. Ivana is a proud Houston native and currently lives in the south end of Seattle. Ivana has over 100 plants and is a collector of unique carnivorous and rare plants. Very cool. So welcome all of you. As you can hear, we have a fantastic panel that we're excited to hear from. Thank you guys for joining us. And we want to start just really with a check-in to ask, how are you? How are you doing? And we know that the last year has been a journey, and would love to just check in. So, Ivana, would you lead us off?
Yeah, well, today I have allergies, so that's how I'm feeling, for being honest. But I think overall, I feel, it's been a lot in the past year when it comes to the pandemic and trying to, organize when you're so used to being in person. Especially when we've just bought a house in Beacon Hill. It's something that, you want to celebrate in person. And, relationship building is something that is a priority and something that we really do. That's, it's huge in Queer the Land. And it's been so difficult when everything is on Zoom, or, you can't have that physical aspect of getting comfort and touching your friend. That's been, one of the most difficult things. But the highlights that have been is just being able to fulfill the dream. Our dream was to own, our own land and labor. We were able to buy a 12-bedroom house, and that has been mind-blowing, honestly. I'm in the house right now, so that has just been like the highlight of my year. It's incredible. And just like the gardening and just like the new folks coming in, and just being able to now more than ever prioritize rest as well. It's been really amazing in comparison to 2020. So yeah, feeling really full, feeling really tired, also just ready to start construction. Yeah.
I feel like we need a tour of the house, but we'll do that for the next event. Tepa, how are you doing? How's it been for you?
I'm doing okay. This morning has been a lot for me. I was just sharing earlier with some of the folks that I woke up just kind of feeling under the weather this morning, and I was starting to cough. And then my father had surgery this morning at 7:30, so I had to make sure that I get him there by 7:30 and then be back to work right after. So I needed that grounding exercise to just kind of like bring myself back to the space and just like make sure I calm down and slow down. It's been, I would say it's been an amazing year, but also it's been a tough year for us, not just for Utopia, but also for the Transgender Economic Empowerment Coalition. A lot of shifts had to happen, in 2020, a lot of changes that we had to adapt to. We had to be innovative and start doing things differently. To continue to engage community was absolutely necessary. But that was something that we always know how to do with touch and feeling. And so it was definitely challenging to be able to just to use what we had access to use technology, to use virtual platforms, softwares that like Zoom. But also there was a huge part of community that we couldn't get to. There's a part of community that not only do not have the skills to navigate like those technologies, but also may not have access to those technologies. Utopia has done a lot of growth in the last year, just from where we were at before 2020, but also not just in terms of staff size, but also in the work that we're doing. And we're very happy with that trajectory. We definitely had a lot of learning to do as we started building leaderships of transgender and gender nonconforming folks. And this year, I can proudly say that we have successfully like engaged like a total of almost 40, I want to say 35 transgender and gender nonconforming folks in our leadership cohort that is still continuing to today. It's probably the largest, it actually is the largest number of folks that we've had in the cohort for this period of time. Usually it's been difficult to engage folks throughout like a cycle of even 9 months. And like we work with communities of color, and there's a lot of needs that we need to take into consideration, and making sure that they have those needs met in order for them to fully engage. So there's a lot more in store of what we want to do, but our goal with that is we've always recognized that one of the biggest challenges that our communities face with like thriving and being involved in certain movements was cultural barriers and language barriers. And a lot of folks can also relate to this, where like being in spaces, it's difficult to be truly present when half of the things that are being said may not exactly translate in your head, or it may take a while for you to process to understand those things. And so our goal is to make sure that like when we are training our own leaders, that we're decolonizing the language and we're decolonizing the approaches that we take, the methods and the tools that we use to build leaderships have to be culturally informed and have to be something that is familiar and relates to our communities.
Thank you, Tepa. It sounds like you've been really busy, and I look forward to diving back into that process of decolonizing our process. Chiguna, how have you been? How are things?
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I've been good. Recently had a newborn, as Deric knows, so I've been really focused in on my new baby boy. So things have been great, but they've also been challenging with kind of finding the balance of things, and kind of speaking towards the last year in our work with the People's Economy Lab. We've really been focused on our local BIPOC communities as they respond to the COVID crisis, focusing on supporting ways to supporting a transition that is just while they are in that recovery. And so we've been really deeply engaged with the challenges that our communities are experiencing with displacement, with the disruption to their economic well-being, and with a lot of the health and social challenges that we're facing at the same time. And so the last year has been sort of the best of times and the worst of times, in the sense that we've seen tremendously powerful responses from our communities to the crisis of COVID-19 and what that has presented to our lives and to our financial and economic well-being. We've seen community leaders dig really deep, come together with community to find solutions to their economic problems and to build power with each other. But we've also seen people tremendously devastated and displaced by COVID. And so it's been really challenging, but really engaging and inspiring at the same time. And so, as you know from being involved in this work, the folks that are doing this work find that there are always 1,000 battles to fight. So it can be very overwhelming, but it can also be very inspiring. There are leaders in various communities that are creating new models and new approaches and are responding to the challenges of the moment in a way that I think will be looked upon as the real leadership in the future. And so I'm really grateful to be a part of this community in the Pacific Northwest and Western Washington in particular, because we see a lot of those young BIPOC leaders emerging from our communities, like our amazing panelists here, really showing us what the next steps forward look like. But we all understand that those steps are a bit uncertain. You know, we're sort of only planning for the next step forward, trying to live in deep community with our people, with our other leaders, so that we can take these steps together. And so it's a challenge, but it's also very exciting and inspiring.
Thanks, Chiguna. Yeah, as we talk about that uncertainty, part of this whole conversation is about navigating the contradictions and the uncertainty, but still taking steps forward and showing the path. And that's what we want to hear a little bit about from each of you next is what is that path you're carving out? What is your model? What is the special sauce that guides your work as you think about the theme for this conversation about building that new economy where you're decolonizing the economy, where you're taking control of land and wealth for community benefit? Can you describe your work in a little bit more depth around where you're building out that new model? And anyone want to jump in first?
Sure. I can go. I would say, well, my role in Queer the Land, I'm the housing coordinator. So at the current moment, I'm handling like the big picture contracts around the house and finding contractors, working on like the electricity, all that fun stuff. But I would say, you know, our whole mission is to own our own land and labor. And we're now in a land trust. So the cool thing about it is, you know, we're here to combat gentrification. Is that our house is located in Beacon Hill. It's by, you know, a store. It's by a bus line, and those are the things that we usually don't have access to because of literally just not having access because of finances, criminal history, being a sex worker, those types of things, and just that being demonized. I know that would have been an issue for me. I was a sex worker for 5 years. And, you know, we're definitely working on creating a new economy because what we realized with COVID is that the government is not going to care about us or help us. And so with that being said, we are working on like semi-private and permanent housing, and it'll be at a really low cost or for some people free. And thinking of ways to generate money and to barter so you don't have to rely on capitalism and just, yeah, how do we support one another? So how do we turn our house into a residential area, but also a place to have folks work? And maybe if someone wants to sell tamales out of their, you know, out of Queer the Land because we're gonna create a commercial kitchen, then how do we make that happen? So things like that. Owning our own land and labor means that, you know, we're gardening, you know, we're creating and growing food for our community and sending it out for free. That also means having a community pantry, which is being built, an apothecary. I would also say education when it comes to finances and skill shares around asking for money and just real estate advice. How can we share our resources that we have? Because historically, we don't have access. I would also say, you know, our model, we get our model from so many places. I am open to sharing from it, but I think about Resist and Dean Spade, and then also the United Students for Against Sweatshops, and how we, you know, our models are like that. So around transparency and accountability, and skill shares. So pulling from our community members and paying them, like if we have the finances to pay folks, because I feel like a lot of times, you know, in our community, labor is just expected and there's no compensation. And so we're out here working full-time jobs and not being able to support our community. And so that's something that is a priority for Queer the Land. I also think about, you know, our organizational structure being a flat horizontal type of structure. So having people who are in positions of power, so, or decision-making processes. For example, I am a core member and I have a lot of decision-making power, but how do I rotate myself so I'm not just sitting here making all the decisions, and at some point I will leave and just become a general member. Our model and the way that we organize is having semi-autonomous circles. So for example, I lead the housing circle, and that means that we make decisions because it's difficult to always get consensus, like with a listserv of 80 people. And so we have like an operations circle, a collective liberation circle, a membership circle, and each person leads that circle, and we come together and we create, you know, we make our decisions that way. And then just to give a few examples of the things that we do, we try to give money back to our community where, you know, not having folks give, excuse my language, but trauma porn when it comes to just explaining their situation. So I know with COVID, folks were asking about, you know, creating all this like criteria around like finances and like just needing to know like your whole situation. And with us, we're just like, you need money. It's a pandemic. The government doesn't care about us. So how can we support you? And being able just to have the agency and power to give folks, you know, thousands of dollars because they need it was really powerful for us. I also think about, you know, get ready, stay ready, being able to provide for our community when COVID hit, being able to dish out masks and all sorts of like things like that. And also the our self-defense, it's called BASE, so building autonomy and safety for everybody. That's something that we also do because QT BIPOC folks, but in particular, Black trans women are the most marginalized and treated as afterthoughts, and how do we protect each other? So that's what I would say, yeah.
Just a couple of things. You've been busy. That is amazing. Really excited to hear about all the different, you know, dimensions of the work. So thank you for sharing that. Tepa, were you going to jump in?
Oh, that was an accident, but sure. How do I follow that? Thank you, Ivana, for that, for sharing a few things. Just to kind of support, you know, some of the things that Ivana was talking about, like organizations that are community-based organizations, grassroots community-led organizations like Queer Land, like Utopia, like, you know, the groups that are on here have strong cultural connections to the communities that we are accountable to. And that allows us to be more informed of their needs. And so sometimes we don't wait on governments. We don't trust the systems to be able to have our backs when for lack of a better word, when shit hits the fan. And so, you know, COVID-19 hit, and we clearly saw how like queer and trans communities, sex workers were like left out of data, were left out of like COVID-19 responses. Intentionally, sex workers were left out altogether. And so sometimes, you know, we can put pressure and try to light a fire on those issues, but sometimes we have to find the resources ourselves and do them ourselves. And so like one of the things that Utopia had to do during last year, during the pandemic, was like fundraising to provide financial assistance. And like we posted a fundraiser on Facebook, and we were able to put together a couple of grants that we applied for, but we created our own federal stimulus for sex workers. You know, we knew that they were never going to be, we tried like methods that they said, there's a way to get sex workers to receive federal stimulus. And we tried that. And still to this day, a lot of the folks that we have helped and assisted through that process still have not received anything. And so what we did was we created our own process. Like, you know what? This is a community that's clearly, this is a population that's clearly left out. We know about it and we are able to get resources to do it. So let's do it ourselves if nobody else is going to do it. Another, I would say, like in doing this work, like one of the most important models that I would always like to uphold is working from the ground up, making sure that when we think of like changing systems, that when we make movements, that we're always placing, that we're always starting from who is most impacted. And as Ivana mentioned, like often, well, not often, always, Black trans and femmes are always the most impacted with systems, with changes. And so always making sure that they are not an afterthought when it's time to create movements or move work, that they are not something that a thought that comes after like strategies are ready, but that they are included from the very beginning, and that the whole work has to be revolved around that experience, because only then can we focus on everybody being able to benefit.
Thank you. And on our side, the People's Economy Lab has really been working to act as a convener that brings together our local BIPOC community development leaders that are building new economic models, to align them, to help support and help build the capacity to create those models. So we are usually not the ones building the models, but sort of bringing together amazing leaders like Tepa and Ivana with others to talk about the new models they're creating, to access examples from around the country and around the world, and to connect and talk about the opportunities and challenges, because we find that there are platforms to create things within the system that fit the parameters of the system. But often, the visionary leaders that are out there blazing the trail don't have the systems they need to sort of incubate and support the work they're doing. And so we've been trying to sort of be that incubating and supportive system that's connecting the dots of this ecosystem of tremendously impactful leaders and organizations. We've been doing that primarily through a fellowship program through which we brought in applications from a number of leaders and organizations throughout our region, and then brought together a selection committee also of BIPOC community leaders to look through those and identify what they feel is most impactful. And we were able to select 6 fellows and also some peer learners to come on, and we were able to fund our fellows with about $40,000 for their projects, and then put them through a 12-month learning cohort through which we provide them with learning and education about the just transition framework and the new economy framework, so they can be equipped with the best tools to approach it. And then also provide them with a peer group of support of other leaders that are in the trenches doing this work, so that, they can pull their head up from the work and talk to others who are also fighting similar battles, because we find that, these battles are tough, and creating the new models takes a lot. And so having a core group that you can sort of align with and reinforce learning and solidarity with is really powerful. And then we have taken upon ourselves to continuously meet with those groups and provide them with ongoing support in building their models. And so some of the examples are, we have Mark Jones of community-owned real estate or resource development, which is a collective of 40+ BIPOC community leaders, primarily based in Southeast Seattle, who are looking to develop an ecosystem for equitable real estate development for our communities and structures of community ownership. Basically, a group of leaders that came together after working within the system for 20 and 30 years, realizing that things aren't working. They've come together to create sort of infrastructure and systems to develop a new path towards a real estate development, which will allow communities to own real estate and land, and for communities to produce our own developers and do our own development, quote unquote. And so we're supporting that project through our fellowship. We're also supporting Yahao, which is an Indigenous artist collective, which creates opportunities for Indigenous artists to collectively work together to advance themselves economically, but also to advance Native culture and the interests of Native artists. They're looking to access land to hold for conservation and to hold not for development at all, but so that land can be held for the use of artists, for use of communities, so that that can contribute to the well-being of communities and to the interests of artists and Native and BIPOC communities locally. We are also working with Via Comunitaria, which is another fellow whose executive director, Analia Bertoli, is our fellow. And that organization is based in South Park and represents our Latin communities there in that region. And they have launched Salsa de la Vida Farming Cooperative Project, which is a project that is a small farm and food business cooperative that is being owned and operated by low-income Latina women that are part of the organization. And the goal is to shift land to community there in South Park and to empower communities led by the women in those communities to create income generating opportunities through that land, and for them to be kind of the leaders of those new economic models. And so, yes, we've been just trying to support these and other projects through our fellowship by providing them with funding, and then also by connecting them to the experts, the supporters, and the funders in communities, so they have the wraparound support they need to be successful.
Thanks, Shaguna. So definitely hearing some themes, a lot around community self-determination and how communities most impacted are often also the most excluded from institutional support, and then how our communities are responding by creating their own economic security while also shifting the institutions to bring to light those disparities. So really great models to learn from. And we want to dive deeper into this, especially the idea of how we actually imagine past the systems that are binding us up now. So when we talk about land ownership and local economies, much of that came from that place of imagining and from necessity. I'm curious what you had to heal or grow or shed in order to bring to life what you've been imagining for your communities. And we can just open up to discussion.
I can go ahead and start with this one. I think this one is it's very personal for me because I think about like some of the most basic needs that I had to take care of to be present, like here today. Colonization, like the Pacific Islands, like really had like an impact of like this trauma that we carry with us today. And so there was a lot of like barriers that we face culturally because of that, a lot of barriers with language, as I spoke earlier, and just feeling inadequate. And like this is something that we've also like observed in our work with our community, feeling inadequate, feeling incompetent because of your inability to for example, put things in English or to say things in English. In Samoa, like for example, a lot of us, we were all educated through the American education system. And so we were always taught to have that faith and have that trust in the system and the government, knowing that like understanding that is what's best and that is what's right. And so there's a lot of unlearning, a lot of healing, and like being able to trust myself and trust ourselves as people and as an organization that is not always data driven, but we have like real strong, powerful lived experiences and stories, and to be able to trust that more than always focusing on data as a lot of like corporate companies focus on data. As Brene Brown said, stories are data with a soul. And so to be able to trust that those stories are much more meaningful and impactful than just some numbers, right? To be able to have those stories to truly inform the work that we do. But in order to get those stories out, there was a lot of healing that we had to do with community, a lot of empowering, because when folks don't understand what's being said to them, they get disengaged, they get disempowered. And so the decolonizing work a lot had to start from like not just with our identities, our gender identities, and not focusing it too much on the binary as we were taught through the American education system, but more so going back to our indigenous roots and embracing who we are that never had a binary attached to it. And with that, we also had to be able to trust that we were competent enough to do this work, and we had every right to do this work from our lived experiences and not base it off of our ability to write a paper or be able to speak English fluently. And so that work continues to, we are continuing to do that work today with our leadership cohorts. And when I talk about policies and campaigns, sometimes like a lot of that conversation is like, it gets lost when our communities are like, what is that? And so a lot of the work that we have to do is not only just adapting the information, but making sure that we speak our community's language so that they fully understand and they get fully engaged and they know how to connect those issues with them versus just hearing a bunch of English words, colorful technical terms that just means nothing to them.
Thank you, Tepa.
Yeah.
Others want to add to that? Is that similar in terms of the ability to really have folks tap into the language they bring, the culture aspect in terms of what was part of that imaginary process, or were the other aspects that were important for you?
Yeah, I think that definitely resonates. I think it's a primary challenge, to challenge the ideas that we've internalized from the system and sort of the empire of ideas that we sort of need to defeat to believe in the new models. I think that's a constant challenge because a lot of it is deeply ingrained and we don't even realize it until we're confronting what it takes to build new models. The idea of doing things in the economy where, these business people, largely, white men in suits, know everything, dominate everything. There's a lot of internalized oppression we have and a lot of attempts we make to justify ourselves to those rules first. And so sort of breaking them down takes a lot of work. And then remembering, right, our more indigenous approaches and models. So I feel like it's a constant struggle, as Tepa was mentioning, and that confronting those models, the model of what is, say, economically viable in your mind, it is constantly a challenge. And confronting the rules and the pushback of the system, and sort of also the positive feedback of the system. I think of the challenges of community organizations when they receive money and when they own assets and property, then a lot of the ingrained ideas tend to come out. And so trying to deconstruct some of those ideas about ownership and about power that come with being able to gain access to money and real estate and being able to do things differently is a challenge. And so yeah, I think that we've seen a lot of opportunity for our organizations and for our leaders. And so as we seek to create new models, we also know that there is a challenge and a danger that we don't fall into old ways of thinking and old ways of doing. And so I think it's just a constant challenge that requires us to come together and collectively kind of work through those challenges and talk about them frankly and seriously, because there's a lot of money going out from EDI, from the city of Seattle, the community organizations, to now become owners of real estate and of property. And so we're thinking about what challenges does that present to community organizations, and similar to when the financial system was giving everybody a loan to get a home. We saw a lot of problems and a collapse arise from that. So seeing some of these things repeat themselves, I've been starting to think about how we help our leaders and our organizations harness sort of the shift in terms of money and land, but to also help us to think through the process we're going through so that we're not reduplicating past mistakes, and also helping and supporting those organizations and leaders to reimagine, because then it becomes really challenging sometimes when you achieve your goal and you got the land and you got the money. And that can be times when we slip back and regress. And so I just find that we need to be very supportive of our community leaders and organizations as they get access to resources to create new models, because that brings new challenges. And our leaders are already challenged in their work, in their personal lives. And so I would just hope that we're all not just, right, because a lot of us are going for funding, there are also a lot of us looking to who's getting the funding and saying, hey, I'm here to support you so that you can be successful with your funding.
Yeah. I like that y'all are addressing colonialism because it makes me think about the condition of being Black and joining Queer the Land, and how it made me feel around someone talking to me and breaking down me having the scarcity mindset. And I was just like, okay. And so I think, being first generation, I'm Nigerian, causes a lot of stress and anxiety around dealing with finances. And, that's something that you have to deal with because, now we're all homeowners. There's 80 plus people in Queer the Land. And so that means there's 80 people who own the house, and it's still, very shocking. And then comes imposter syndrome because you're just like, wow, I cannot believe. So I think about that and having to heal from just feeling the need to prove so many things. And I also feel that our culture, and also just being, not sometimes, a lot of us are not having a lot of access to money and resources, and having a house where you can just come and relax. And that's been an issue with Queer the Land, is people are just like, oh my God, I don't know if I can just come and use the house. And it's been here for a few months now. And I'm just like, yeah, we got Wi-Fi. That whole mindset of just like, I don't know, I'm afraid, things like that, it's difficult. And so one of the things we just started talking about is like opulence. There's nothing wrong with us having nice things, and there's nothing wrong with us declining your used bed that's 7 years old. Thinking about how do we change the scarcity mindset that we do deserve things? How do we change that imposter syndrome that like you are enough and you're doing the damn thing? It's so difficult when colonialism is just beating us down. So having to heal from that has been difficult, and it's ongoing. It's a constant struggle, I think, especially with collectives, especially when you break it down to nonprofits and institutions. It's, people don't want to admit it, but just to have someone tell me to my face, yeah, you're out here operating under that mindset. I was just like, okay, never heard that before. Joining Queer the Land, I was so broke and having to just ask for money, that type of thing. But having to, in terms of thinking about land ownership and local economies, and thinking, wow, we need to have like real conversations and relationship building so we can talk about the whys and the whats and what's going on with ourselves. And slowly realizing that asking for help is okay. So healing from that, just a lot of trauma around housing, which is why I joined Queer the Land. It's very fulfilling. I said, if I came back to organizing, that's what I would do. So learning to be vulnerable is what I had to grow into, to be honest. Lastly, I think about with Queer the Land, what we've had to shed, or not even shedding. I think, when it comes to multiracial organizing, there's always going to be that, hinge of anti-Blackness. But what I enjoy is that we've been able to just talk about it and have research within our own collective to say, we need a compensation model for the Black folks. Like, how do we talk about money, and why is it so hard and difficult to ask and discuss about it? And if we're really going to be about that life around making a new economy, how do we talk about it? So that's us having workshops with our lawyer that helped us buy the house, or that's just employing community members who have backgrounds around fundraising and how do you ask for money. And honestly, that's still a struggle of mine, but just to be able to talk about your feelings has been really nice to see our community grow in that way and heal in that way. It's definitely been bringing life to the house and helping us reimagine what things look like, and just say, a lot of times we're just yelling like opulence, 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 because it's just, it's colonialism, and just the government will just beat you down. And so how do we affirm that we're more than enough?
Can I, Deric, can I add on to that? Ivana made me think about during the first couple of years when we started building our leadership cohort, and we started offering like financial literacy class and like budgeting skills. And one of the things that I realized later is like, why am I trying to provide opportunities for budgeting skills to a community that probably first needs an opportunity to make money? Like, it was just like, I'm trying to like look for an opportunity to teach them budgeting skills, yet they're being pushed away from opportunities to make money because of their gender expression, their gender identity. And then the only other option that like a lot of folks were having, with the community that we work with is criminalized, right? It's sex work. And so like that, like, aligns so much with what I was talking about earlier, just like following like those stories and following that need so that we can reshift our work to make sure that we address like what's important, right? Like while everyone might hold financial literacy up here as like maybe that's something that comes later down the line for us, and there was like things that we need to focus on first to make sure that folks can actually thrive, you know, with transgender, non-conforming, gender diverse folks, like we need to address housing stability. We're not able to thrive, you know, if we don't have a roof over our head. We need to take care of our health, and by doing that, we need to access to quality and competent health care. And we can't even completely take good care of our health so that we can thrive if we don't have a roof over our head. And so definitely, when as Ivana was talking, I had a flashback to like that experience of like how we constantly had to realize and like unlearn and reshift our work to just truly focus on the needs of our community, right? Yeah, financial literacy is important, but that is not what's pressing right now for them. There is something that needs to be addressed for them to get to a point where that should even be something that they need to consider.
Yeah, so we heard a lot there just from the work that's happening in community in terms of the shifts that need to occur to what you were just getting at, that the larger institutions that kind of create our realities, and just going into that a little bit more, you know, thinking about the shifts that we need and the larger culture and institutional systems. Just kind of, if you guys could talk a little bit more about what kind of shifts we need to see from our culture and institutionally, what support in particular that would facilitate this transition, you know, in particular around kind of local economies, local economic empowerment. How do we make in particular the cultural transition that makes that possible? Thinking from, you know, you've talked a lot about what's happening in community, but from the external world, if you see a role there that's not being met, or how to best provide support.
I think I can jump in here. I think it would be, you know, shifting the narrative around the economy generally. I think that's a key component to changing the perception of the wider society around the economy and around some of these assumptions that are choices that we make and are not immutable laws. And by changing some of those, in order to change some of the rules in our society that would help us create these new models that would create more thriving, we need to shift the narratives about the economy that folks throughout our society are signing on to and are ingraining. And so I think that's a key opportunity to share the work of the leaders that are reimagining, you know, land stewardship, land ownership, and really changing how our wider society understands our past and what has happened and what's really happening right now with the economy. Even the story of our city of Seattle, as we experience tremendous displacement, has a core story of just a city that's been really competitive. It's been great at tech. And so as a result of its greatness in technology, everybody wants to move here. And a few people who can't meet the standard have been pushed out. That general story has so many implicit flaws and toxic elements that, you know, we see those problems also come into effect in the solutions to the problem when it's sort of told that way. And so I think one of the first things we need to do is shift the story of what's happening so that a wider circle of people understand the reality of what's happening from the perspective of our local BIPOC communities and from the leaders that are reimagining the rules, the unspoken rules of the economy, and then the flat out statutory rules of the economy.
Or Tepa, were you gonna go? Okay. Yeah, I'm thinking about this question. I'm also a Pisces, so I always really go super deep. It makes me think of relationship building, especially when it comes to intergenerational relationship building and having that access to information, just passing that cultural transition down the line and seeing the changes that have been happening locally, and I guess also on social media and in general. You know, a few years ago, sex work wasn't really even talked about. And I was a sex worker and I wasn't even talking about it, and no one knew, and the lack of support. And so I say that to use it as an example of the institutional aspect and the fact that it needs to be decriminalized and destigmatized, especially when it comes to our own community, and how I've just seen in the last couple of years that people are having that conversation to be able to talk to my parents and just the community about what I used to do, and seeing them have that discussion and understanding of where that type, like, you know, the where and the why and just all those types of things has been refreshing. But you can't get that without having some sort of relationship building and having access to information as to why people do what they do. I think about destigmatization, I cannot say, destigmatization of the things that we deem bad, because I think about housing and how that also needs to shift. Queer the Land is made up of sex workers, formerly incarcerated folks, you know, immigrants, refugees, people who have, you know, who are neurodivergent, and how do we have conversations around that so we can make sure folks are able to mesh. And I feel like that's what needs to shift in our culture locally across the board. And folks need to have a seat at the table and not just be a token that's just like dropped there. What would it look like to have a whole bunch of trans folks making decisions? And that's something that I feel like is unheard of a lot of the times, or yeah. And now I feel like it's being talked about, but how do we put it into practice? We can talk about it all we want. So that's the shift that I want to see, but I'm slowly seeing some sort of conversation. And it's been really nice to have like intergenerational talks and share that access of information, and just like my experiences and other folks' experiences around, you know, what we've gone through. But yeah, I would just say access to information and having a seat at the table to have, you know, decision-making processes, especially when it comes to, you know, the government. You think about, I don't want to call the city out, but I will, about around who's making decisions there and who's actually pulling the strings. And a lot of the times it's not the most marginalized person. It's usually a white cis person, and a man at that. So that's the shift I need to see, especially when it comes to institutional things. And there's so many models, I think, to share, but I'm definitely down to email about it or put in the chat. But yeah, I talk about sex work because it's an economy that it's one of the largest economies, and it's stigmatized so intensely, yet everybody is contributing to that economy. And so how do we bring it to the forefront and erase that stigma? So that's why I keep talking about it, because a lot of us are doing it for survival, and a lot of us are just doing it because you make money from it. And so how do we talk about it? It's really infuriating, and something that needs to be talked about every single time someone is on this type of panel, especially when it comes, when we're talking about economy, you know, economics, land ownership. Because I think about, if I got caught, would I be able to give, you know, a loan or, you know, access to certain things? Probably not. So that's what I think about.
Yes, Ivana. So one of the things that comes to mind for me is I always tend to think about like I mentioned before, competent healthcare for trans folks. and not access to healthcare. And so there is like a lack of access to even like informed providers that understand what we're looking for in our identities. And it also brings up, the thought of like, is transgender health intentionally being ignored by academia since we're not seeing a lot of providers that are informed, but also like thinking about like better employment practices that are inclusive, but not just in hiring practices and saying that we hire trans folks, but making sure that there are policies that are in place to support and prevent discrimination and victimization of like trans folks inside the workplace. And also that employment practices, but like also connecting to what Ivana was sharing, that also includes sex work. Also making sure like that sex workers are being provided with like protection and that they need safety, and that the victims shouldn't always be blamed when they are facing violence and abuse by law enforcement or even by like even clients. But like decriminalization of sex work is like, that is such a big conversation. Like, like that is something like we can't even get to decriminalization without doing destigmatization that Ivana talked about. Like we have to talk about the stigma attached to sex work. We have to like normalize having conversations so that people understand like some of the misconceptions that like they tend to have about like what's sex work and what's human trafficking, and they are not the same. And that conflation has caused a lot of issues with like, especially like trans folks in sex work. What else do I think about? I think those are just the three main points that I wanted to point out to that question. If I have any later, I'll unmute.
And we're going to get to Q&A shortly. So if folks want to enter questions there, we'll go to that next. Just one last question to ponder for you all. And it is just kind of reflect briefly. It's amazing how much we talk about the economy and all we talk about are like major corporations, let alone workers, let alone just the formal economy versus something like sex work, which is, huge part of our economy and not acknowledged. So thanks for bringing that in. All right, so last question for you guys to think about, and we can just kind of do this brief if you have any reflections, but just to take an experiment of imagining a world free of capitalism, or imagining this new economy in the world that you guys are really building for. What does it sound, feel, taste, or smell like? Curious if you have reactions.
Okay. Free of capitalism. That is so difficult sometimes, I think, to think about. But I feel like it sounds like laughter and just enjoying ourselves. I think sometimes we slip away and we're just like, especially with QTL retreats, I think about that and not being in that space. So I think about laughter. So it sounds like that. It feels like a warm hug, I think. Being able to have your needs met. I think about everybody being housed and folks not being hungry and not having to compete for resources, which a lot of, community-based organizations, nonprofits have to do just to get folks' needs met. I also feel like a world without capitalism means that I won't be doing this work anymore. I'll just go back to Parks and Rec because everybody's needs are met. And that's really what it feels like and looks like, is that I won't be a housing coordinator. I'll just be Ivana, who works for Parks and Rec, because I don't have to sit there and keep fighting for folks to have, $1,000 for their rent, or, $1,000 for their healthcare and things like that. So I think that's honestly what it feels like, is that everyone's needs are met and we're not competing for anything in opulence.
Yeah. You can go, Teva.
Thank you. I've always struggled with this question. So I sat in a workshop once where somebody did this question, but in the form of like a grounding exercise where like you think about like going into the future and like you imagine all these things and then like you open your eyes and you see this, your vision basically, and like, you know, what does it look like? And every time I've done this, like, and I've sat in like maybe 3 workshops that did the same, every time I found, like, I did this, I found myself not going into the future, but going into the past. And, you know, I tried to explain to folks like so many times, like, I don't know, it's like everything that I wish to see in the future, I feel like it's a lot of them we had. And so maybe that's why I find myself going in the past, because like I think about like a world where like a world that's genderless, and a world where like that not only men were supposed to be in certain positions. And so I think about the past of like my history and my cultural heritage, like the first chief of Samoa was a woman, or what we would identify today as a woman. But that didn't matter, nor did it have any bearing to like her becoming the chief. It was just, she was just a chief. And so a lot of like the binary and like these structures of like who should be in these positions and like what men are supposed to do as compared to like what women are supposed to do, and that like there shouldn't be trans, there shouldn't be a third gender, like all those structures came from like colonialism, from when white Christians arrived at our shores to bring Christianity. And so, yeah, our people in Samoa are very much religious in that sense, but I've always questioned it because it was brought from a white lens. Christianity was brought to Samoa from a white lens, and I've always been that curious about like, why did we just take that as the Bible and run with it? Why do we keep practicing everything today and like as if we should actually take it as the absolute truth? How do we know that it was not an agenda for these white men to, so that we could continue to perceive them exactly the same way that we do today, as smarter, as superior, as more innovative, more successful, wealthier? So yeah, the answer to that question for me is I would say I think about the past. I think about the times before colonialism, before we knew of capitalism, honestly. That's what it looks like to me. I don't know exactly what it would smell like, but that's what it looks like to me. And I would say that it sounds like a lot of beating drums and that it tastes sweet.
I don't think there's much I can add to that. That was perfect.
Okay, thank you for bringing that. All right, so we have some great comments and questions in the Q&A box, and I want to dive into those right now. So here's one. Another issue we faced in this colonialistic white supremacist culture is the concept of competition. Competition for resources, grants, investors, housing, etc., which at times creates a disconnection or conflict within our community and among BIPOC communities. Is there a model that could make competition work to strengthen communities, or do we need another model altogether? It's a tough one, huh? Basically, and there's another comment I'll just kind of bring into this, because talking about how you guys have done a great job describing how it's not a zero-sum game, right? So which is kind of the opposite of that, basically. But how do we deal with the, I guess, the system that's in front of us, which is inherently about competition and pitting people against each other? Are there ways that you brought that into your work and responding with something different?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of different types of models, again, which I have a whole Google Doc of. But I think about the fact that a lot of us, well, I'm queer, and so I feel like by default, I feel like we just think organized differently in the fact that everybody deserves to win. And so I think about how if, you know, someone doesn't have the funds, I know like we work with like Trans Women of Color Solidarity Network, and they may be going through something, or we may be going through something, and we just like lean on each other for those types of things. Like, can you help this person? They are low on funds, or can you help us? We need 1,000 masks, things like that. I think it comes from, again, relationship building, so you can trust one another. I think I like the question, but it also makes you think of like white supremacy and how a lot of times like folks are operating, you know, through that type of lens, because you know, before joining Queerland, I definitely had that mindset where I'm just like, and that just sounds like a scarcity mindset type of thing where everyone, like the resources are just not there, when in actuality, we are all somewhat doing kind of the same thing. And the resources are there, we just have to share it, and everybody, you know, everybody deserves to win. It kind of just keeps making me think about like white supremacy culture and how we're just so concerned about what somebody else has, when there's more, you know, more than enough to go around. And makes me think about wealth as well. So that would be my answer to that question, that, you know, reimagining what, you know, how you operate in a white supremacist culture, and what ideals are you bringing in to your group or your life, or just you as a person.
Yeah, and I think, you know, as Savannah brought up, there are a number of challenges with kind of competition in our culture and in our systems. And so I think in our work, we found that kind of a big answer to that, we think, is sort of, you know, what's been called building beloved community, and really communities that are normally in competition in a certain framework, really working to build deep relationships, deep engagement, and to come together in a culture of beloved community, recognizing that we all have shared interests, right? That, like has been mentioned, that we all deserve to win. And I think we've seen that when different groups, different leaders come together and, you know, authentically engage in beloved community and become like family to some degree, you naturally are going to think of your family. Like everybody has to eat, you know, when there's food, you have to share. It's just something that is deeply ingrained in you. So I think we don't have all the answers to how you're going to defeat the multiple layers of competition out here, but we know that when we live in beloved community with each other, and we engage deeply and consistently and constantly, we develop what overcomes that through that love and through that community. And so I think that's really the only answer right now, and that beloved community and that deep engagement creates, you know, groups of allies and family members who will strategize together and who will figure out that, hey, you go for this and you get this money, and you eat over here, you eat over there, and we can sort of collectively approach things in this uber competitive system. But first, we need to be on the same side. We need to deeply have relationships with each other and have love for each other so we can move together.
Thank you for that. Thoughtful responses. And another question here is about the skills or information that you all are pursuing right now in your communities to build towards meeting your economic needs and that just transition to a new economy. Are there skills or information that you think is most important for building right now?
I love this question, because that is, again, our whole thing is building our own land and labor, and labor is it's a vast term, but we want to be able to repair our house and be self-reliant. And I think about the fact that we're having all these types of classes and employing our own community. And one thing that comes to mind is just being able to build furniture and being able to just have woodworking skills, and how do we teach our community skills that we wouldn't really, have the opportunity to do or have to, pay for. One of the biggest things with QTL is skill sharing. So somebody has a skill, whether it's like, in finances. So like we have a lawyer that helped us with our house purchasing process. So he has a lot of finance skills, real estate, all that. So we use him when it comes to skill shares, and that, definitely answers this question. But also just how do we teach folks how to do things and barter and share their wealth of knowledge? And so we do that with skill shares, and just thinking differently of how we can not rely on capitalism, whether that is just, resource sharing, creating a community pantry where there's just food and not having to rely on the government to give you fresh food and good types of meat, and doing, in December, we had like a grocery delivery program. So things like that, and empowering people to feel like they're able to, do the work and participate. So I'd say just looking to your own folks and not having to look towards other places. There's so many people like myself. I used to think, oh my God, I don't have a degree. Like, how am I going to do X, Y, and Z? And then just thinking about the wealth of knowledge that I have and how do you tap into that? So that's what I think about.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add that I think it's not really a tool or a skill, but perspective, like Ivana has just articulated, moving. And I think that perspective is moving from a center of our own power, recognizing our own power and value, as kind of Ivana just mentioned, and starting from that point. And once we shift our consciousness, as you can see they have, is that allows us to move from a center of power and to identify opportunities, to identify new models and new shifts. And so I think that is kind of the critical element I'd like to share, is just that moving from a center of our own power and value, seeing economic power in us as we are, not as they think we should be, not as a mask of us, but as we are. I think when we understand that we are powerful, we are valuable, and we're able to shift perspective and step back and look at ourselves, we'll see where the power is and where we can generate income, generate money in the system by generating value for us, from us. I think we've seen leaders throughout our communities doing that powerfully, and they all show that shift of consciousness, that they see power in self and community and move from that center, not another center.
I agree. A lot of shifting like perspective. Also, like something that we always advocate for is cultivating like a culture of curiosity, and like to be able to like be present with the discomfort that you are in the unknown and that you may not know, because when you recognize that, then usually that puts us in a position where like we're going to learn something new. And so we do a lot of like sharing of like presenting people with like options that they may not be aware of that they have, due to like due to language barriers or shame or trauma, whatever prevented them from being able to like find out what options are available to them. Sometimes it's just like sometimes we're surprised at the reaction when we share like, you have the options to do this, this, and that. And like sometimes the responses are like, I didn't know I could do this. I didn't know I had this option. And so I think that's what's great about like having a strong cultural connection to like the communities that we're accountable to, is that we can be able, what I'm trying to say is we may have a better understanding of like where that need is and how to address it.
Thank you, Tepa, and thanks to everyone. I think we can probably go on for another couple of hours because there's so much to talk about, but really grateful to be in conversation with you. We are close to the hour, so I'm going to turn it back to Roxana for next steps.
Deric, thanks to Jaguna and Ivana. Thank you all so much for sharing your imagination with us and for what you've all been able to cultivate and steward in your communities. This was incredibly powerful, incredibly validating and affirming to all of those who are on very aligned paths with you all. So thank you so much again. As Kai says in the chat, like such a gift for y'all to be here with us today and for sharing your vision and your imaginations, because those are very sacred. And as Ivana said, they're very vulnerable. And so thank you so much for living in your imagination and in your visions, and for stewarding us into a new way of being, because we know we need it. We absolutely need it. So we are going to wrap up. Thank you all so much for everybody who has been here. Just a couple follow-up items. You will get a survey sent to your email, the email that was registered to this event. Please provide us some feedback. Again, we have 4 more events that we will be hosting. The next one is in August, and it's Cultivating Community Imagination Culture Shifts. So we are going to continue on this wave of how do we start to shift culture, because I think that's, you know, folks want, we're yearning for that. We are needing that. And I think it's 2-part, like Tepa said, like it's imagining, but it's also a returning. So how do we imagine and return at the same time? And so I invite you all to join us on this journey of cultivating community. Again, thank you so much to our panelists and to our moderator. Appreciate you all. Take care. I'm going to go engage in some opulence because it is Leo season. And I love that word. And I'm going to just put that on my vision board because that word is just opulent. So thank you all so much. Blessings, everybody. Please take care. Take care of yourselves, of the planet, drink some water and get some rest. See you later.
Thank you.